Hello and welcome to a tactical history of Liverpool. Liverpool's 1970-71 league campaign hadn't been a successful one. The damage had been done prior to Christmas, recalled Tommy Smith, as Liverpool won just 8 of their first 25 matches. As the new men began to acclimatise and others returned from injury though, things began to fall into place for Liverpool towards the end of January, just in time for the FA Cup. They kicked off their run by hosting 4th Division Aldershot. This saw the return of former player Jimmy Melia, now their player manager, and although his side put up a fight, a goal from John McLaughlin saw the Reds advance. In the 4th round, Liverpool were drawn against 3rd Division Swansea. They dispatched them 3-0, with Ian St John coming on as a substitute to score in what would be his final ever appearance for Liverpool. They made tougher work of 1st Division Southampton, dominating but struggling to convert their chances, although a goal from defender Chris Lawler was enough to see them through. Liverpool would finally play away from home in the 6th round, but only after a 0-0 draw at Anfield forced a replay. Travelling down to London to face Tottenham Hotspur, Liverpool progressed thanks to a goal from Steve Highway. This set up a Merseyside derby in the semi-finals, with Liverpool facing Everton at Old Trafford, seeing Liverpool supporters take over the Stretford end. Everton manager Harry Catterick was missing with a flu, yet the Blues started the match for better side, going ahead through Alan Ball 10 minutes in. Ian Callaghan had an equaliser disallowed for a questionable handball, but it wasn't until after half-time that Liverpool really began to fight back. The key moment, according to John Toshak, was the substitution of Brian LeBone for Sandy Brown minutes into the second half, after the Scouse centre-back picked up an injury. Minutes later, Highway sent through Alan Evans to equalise. Yes! And a quarter of an hour later, Evans sent a high cross into the box. Without LeBone protecting him, goalkeeper Andy Rankin had to come for it, recalled Toshak. I had 2 ways of going up for a header. If the ball was coming in from the right, I'd have my left eye looking out at the goal and the keeper. If he wasn't coming, I'd go full throttle to head it at goal. But if he was, I'd go up with my left arm raised a bit, protecting me and rightly or wrongly making it difficult for the keeper to get a clean catch on it at the same time. Rankin was drawn far from his line and then dropped the ball, falling at the feet of Brian Hall to score his first goal for the Reds and see them through to the final, where they were to face newly crowned champions Arsenal. The last time we met Arsenal, all the way back in episode 7, legendary player Billy Wright was proving to be a less than legendary manager. He was dismissed at the end of the 1966 season, and rather than look for another man with a storied career in football to replace him, Arsenal did the opposite, promoting physio Bertie Mee to manager. Mee's time as a professional footballer had been brief. He first signed for Derby County, yet never played a game for them, before moving on to Mansfield. After 13 appearances for them, the Second World War put his career on hold, during which he played as a guest for Southampton, and an injury put an end to it. Mee would instead become a physiotherapist in the Royal Army Medical Corps, and then join the Ministry of Health, helping to run a rehabilitation centre for the treatment of various disabilities. His route back into football came when he held the FA-run training courses for treating injuries, earning the respect of many in the game for his expertise. This role saw him work alongside Alan Bass, Arsenal's club doctor, and when Billy Milne retired in 1960, Bass recommended to the club that Mee replace him as physio. Few would predict his promotion in 1966 though. Mee himself was unsure, requesting a get-out clause that allowed him to return to his old role if his new one didn't work out. Mee may not have had any experience as a manager, but that didn't mean he didn't have the necessary skills. His time in the army had taught him the importance of discipline, which he went about instilling into his squad.
He was like a little general, he was almost like a little Napoleon, and he could be quite sharp with you, and certainly I remember Frank having rare old set-twos with Bertie.
And his previous jobs had already given him experience of organising large groups, albeit of soldiers and healthcare workers rather than footballers.
You've set standards, and that was the great word at Arsenal was always standards, and that was Bertie to a T, don't drop your standards, boys.
Mee admittedly wasn't an expert on football, but he didn't pretend to be. He instead delegated this part of his role to his assistants, empowering them to make up for his shortcomings. Dave Sexton initially tightened up what Mee considered to be a leaky defence, and when Sexton left to become Chelsea manager in 1967, he was replaced by reserve team coach Don Howe, who had retired as a player the year before. Howe continued Sexton's work, introducing a zonal marking system.
Bertie Mee was a great organiser, very disciplined guy, wasn't great in tactics or in coaching, but he knew that Don was, and he allowed Don to go on with that, and he did all the organisation, kept the discipline extremely tight in our club. And no matter how hard Don trained us, and he trained us extremely hard, As soon as Bertie walked on the scene, we even stepped up the tempo again. It was a very disciplined, tightly run ship, and a lot of it was down to both of them for different reasons.
Then he had his right-hand man, who was Don Howe, who was truly inspirational. I mean, we loved Don. I mean, he was very tactile. So he was absolutely in your face. I can remember wiping away a bit of spit here and there if he was in your face saying, "Willow, you didn't do this." And I would be fighting back. And then if you played well, if you performed, he would be arms around you, hugging you, incredibly tactile. So there was Bertie Mee, there was Don Howe.
Mee's Arsenal were far from an overnight success, though. They finished 7th in his first season, and although they made it to the final of the League Cup in 1968 and 1969, they lost on both occasions. The second embarrassingly to 3rd Division Swindon Town. The next year they would win their first trophy in 17 years when they beat Anderlecht to claim the Intercity's Fairs Cup. However, they finished 12th in the league, meaning few were expecting a title challenge at the beginning of this season. Things have finally fallen into place for Arsenal though. Originally a midfielder, Captain Frank McClintock had covered in defence at the end of the previous season when Peter Simpson was out injured. After a few games at centre-half, I felt totally revitalised and took to defending with the converts further, he remembered.
I always associate Frank with a general in the army, you know. He was the one who used to lead us all into battle, and we were all behind him 100%. He gave everybody this great feeling of togetherness, never give in, and he expected everybody underneath him not to give in either.
For me, he was the greatest captain I ever played with. And played under, and Frank McClintock just was. He was out of the Gorbals, he was a fighter. He'd had quite a tough life to where he'd got to. He'd been in 4 losing Wembley finals. So by then, he knew everything there was to get to finals, but never to pick up the winner's medal. And he just was a very, very inspirational leader.
I was a natural captain. I don't think I ever planned anything out. I just was so enthusiastic. I had an awful lot of drive and probably still have a lot of that in me. I'm just that type of person. So I would just act normally, grab people by the throat at half-time.
With the help of left-back Bob McNabb and Howe, he soon grasped what being a defender entailed, along with Arsenal's zonal system and offside trap, forming an excellent partnership with a returning Simpson. This opened up a spot in midfield, so George Graham was moved back from further forward. Nicknamed Stroller, the Scot was an elegant player, but perhaps not the hardest working defensively.
And Frank and I were big mates, but even a couple of times, you know, he swung a punch at me, you know, coming up the tunnel at half time for not working hard enough.
So the brutal Peter Storey was moved into midfield to give it some steel.
You needed a strong physical player there to combat other players, and Peter did that job down the routine. He gave the team balance and solidity, and you can't underestimate how important that was, Peter Storey going into that midfield position.
This in turn opened up a spot at right back for Pat Rice to emerge. Graham's move back also opened up a spot in attack, playing off of unselfish striker John Radford.
Radford was so underrated, I thought. I mean, John Radford today would be one of the best strikers in the country. Very similar to Shearer, you know, very similar physique and everything about his game.
John Radford was John Radford. He was one of the lads that I was sort of brought up with it through the youth team. Very unselfish player. Although he's a big man, John, he was very nimble, but just so unselfish. You know, he would make one run, and if he didn't get the ball, he wouldn't say, "Oh, he'd make another one," and then make another one. Very unselfish.
I was a centre forward. You go out there trying to get a goal every game. I think myself, I wasn't a prolific goal scorer anyway, you know, when you look back through the career, but I think everyone appreciated who actually played alongside you.
This was initially expected to go to local boy Charlie George, who had emerged the previous season. Undoubtedly talented with a thunderous shot, George wasn't the most disciplined of players, leading to inevitable clashes with disciplinarian Mee. Bertie wasn't a great manager of flair players, George would later complain. He was banished to the reserves for 3 months of his debut campaign, but played a key role in Arsenal's Fairs Cup victory. A broken ankle on the first day of the 70-71 season saw him ruled out until the new year though, giving an opportunity to teenager Ray Kennedy. He grabbed it with both hands, finishing the season with 26 goals.
Yes, Kennedy! Ray Kennedy, 19 years of age.
Well, Ray was like just over 6 foot, fantastic physique, and very left-footed, but he could hold the ball up with his strength, shrug, defenders off, and he would used to bring other players into the game.
The previous year, he scored an away goal in the European Fairs Cup final as a young lad, which gave us a chance in the second leg. And then Ray came into the team and forged a real great partnership with John Radford. And he was such a good team player, Ray Kennedy, but also a number of goals he scored in that double season was really good.
He was a mean character, he didn't suffer fools gladly. In five-a-sides there would be the odd punch-ups, but he was brilliant with back to goal. And it was almost, when introduced suddenly alongside John Radford, it was just like you unearthed a diamond somewhere. And the two created suddenly the best partnership that you could imagine in what was then the First Division.
Bob Wilson had taken over from Jim Furnell in goal after years as his understudy and proved to be a more than capable replacement.
Even I was coming together as the late developer and believing that I could, on my day, perform as well as the best goalkeepers in the country.
Bob, funnily enough, in the footballing circles was probably underrated, but not at Arsenal. Bob he made himself a goalkeeper. His work ethic, Monday to Friday in training was fantastic. And he made him a better goalkeeper himself. But he loved coaching, he loved being coached. He worked hard at it. Any improvement was really down to Bob. He had a great feeling for wanting to get better and better.
Or George Armstrong, now in his 10th season with Arsenal, was sending quality crosses from either flank.
George Armstrong on the wing. George was a special player for us because he could play either side, cross the ball with both feet, and his work rate was absolutely brilliant. I think he epitomised the Arsenal team at that time.
With Eddie Kelly, Sammy Nelson and John Samuels providing good quality backup to fill in any gaps, Mee had built a strong team.
But we had other good kids coming in, like John Samuels, who played brilliantly for us as well, Eddie Kelly, and it wasn't always the same team all the time, so the 16 players were vitally important. John Roberts at the back coming in for Peter Simpson, so everybody played their part.
Arsenal started the season slowly, winning just 2 of their opening 6 matches, then getting thrashed 5-0 by Stoke City in September. This beating was perhaps the humbling Arsenal needed though. After it, they went on a 14-match unbeaten run stretching from October through to January, catching up with league leaders Leeds United. Then a 9-game win streak in the spring saw them go top in mid-April. Arsenal would have to wait until the final day to become champions. Away to rivals Tottenham, Arsenal were 1 point behind Leeds, who had already completed their fixtures, so all they needed was a win or a goalless draw to seal the league, and they managed it with a late header from Kennedy. Alongside their title run-in, Arsenal also progressed in the FA Cup. They got the opposite draw to Liverpool, drawn away in every round, yet still made it to the final, leaving them needing just one more victory to complete the double. In this era, the double held a similar prestige to what the treble does today. Only 3 teams had ever managed the double, and 2 of them were in the 1800s. Arsenal's rivals Tottenham were the sole team to have managed it in this century. Rather than being celebrated, this Arsenal team was generally looked down upon by the media though. We had none of the languid eye-catching charm of teams that executed short-passing football for the sake of it, or the type of self-indulgent funny merchants who gloried in pointless tricks, said McClintock. But we also had our fair share of dangerous attacking players. At the back, Stan Simpson and I were both former midfielders who had no fear of passing. Further forward, George Graham had great subtle skill. Eddie Kelly was fabulously creative, and Geordie Armstrong was a terrific attacking winger. Up front, Charlie George had a Johnny Haynes-like ability to spot an opening, and Raddy and Ray Kennedy had amazing control to go with their prodigious work rate. We were not a team of big lumps who blustered our way to the title. It was not for this attacking quality that Arsenal were recognised though. According to McClintock, following their September thrashing by Stoke, they went back to what they called ground rules for the next game, setting the tone for the rest of the season. That meant imposing ourselves for the first 20 minutes, not letting the opposition win any headers, constantly pressurising the ball and not letting defenders lift their heads up, rattling into tackles with everything we had and flattening opponents with every ounce of our weight. It was all about attitude and tempo and generally not giving any quarter. This pressing was a relatively new concept, and it was unpopular with those who wanted to see individuals given space to show off their skills. In the old days, the better team once said McNabb, when you had the ball, you played, and when they had the ball, they played. There was no pressuring. Arsenal were pressuring, hustling, knocking people down all over the field like ice hockey. The double was considered the pinnacle of what a team could achieve, reserved for the likes of Invincible Preston or Bill Nicholson's push and run Tottenham. With a team like Arsenal, solid if unspectacular, primarily getting by on organisation, scoring 15 fewer goals to win the league than Newcastle had getting relegated a decade prior. If they could do the double, then it was seen to be devaluing the achievement, yet here they were, one game from doing so. With Peter Storey passing a late fitness test, Arsenal fielded a full-strength side for the final. He started on the right of midfield to help out Pat Rice with Steve Highway, seeing Charlie George partner George Graham in the middle. Arsenal lined up in a 4-4-2 shape. For Liverpool, the question was over who would start in attack. In the end, Bill Shankly went with Highway and Alan Evans over Peter Thompson, who was chosen as substitute. Thompson had started the season as first choice, one of the few senior players to avoid the post-Watford cull. An injury curtailed his season in December. He returned in March, but was in and out of the side as the younger men impressed. Shankly made one change from the 11 we saw in episode 29, with Ian Ross making way for Ian Callaghan. Brian Hall moved back into midfield as Callaghan took up his usual spot on the wing. Liverpool matched Arsenal's 4-4-2 formation. It was Liverpool that started stronger, as Arsenal couldn't stop giving free kicks away in the opening minutes. It appeared that Frank McClintock and Peter Simpson, both under 6 foot, were having trouble dealing with the lanky John Toshak. Liverpool were willing to send the ball long to the Welshman, and he was able to knock it down or flick it on for his teammates. Toshak would be a primary target for Liverpool's players throughout the game. Once Liverpool entered the final third, they would often look to cross towards the back post, where Toshak would be waiting. By contrast, Liverpool's defenders had little problems dealing with Arsenal's long balls. Larry Lloyd was fantastic throughout, particularly dominating in the air, winning most headers, but also putting in some crunching tackles and showing off his ability to anticipate play by intercepting the ball. Both John Radford and Ray Kennedy would look to pull out away from the centre-backs into wide areas. However, Chris Lawler was dominant in the air too, cutting out Arsenal's attempts to go direct down the left. Arsenal also attempted to use their usual pressing game, however Liverpool coped well with it, refusing to be panicked into giving the ball away. Arsenal soon worked their way into the game though. Liverpool also looked to press Arsenal, yet the Gunners' midfield began to showcase their quality on the ball. George Graham seemed to be particularly enjoying the occasion, showing off his close control and some slick passes. There were times where he appeared overconfident though, giving the ball away sloppily. Alongside him, Charlie George displayed his passing range. Bob McNabb was able to overlap down the left. And on the opposite side, Pat Rice also ventured forward, albeit to a lesser extent. Now able to hold on to the ball rather than turning it over to Liverpool, Arsenal put together some nice passing moves. Liverpool was still in the game, having some nice moves of their own, however they weren't threatening Arsenal. Steve Highway was being watched closely by Rice, and Storey went in hard on him several times too, giving him little space to work in. Alan Evans once again showed glimpses of his ability, displaying a nice first touch, or good close control. However, he never did anything to actually worry the Arsenal defence, usually giving the ball away cheaply. The way Arsenal defended helped to constrain Liverpool's attackers. Their midfielders would drop back to protect their defence, squeezing the space available to their opponents, and they would retreat quickly, getting men back behind the ball to deny Liverpool the opportunity to counter. Arsenal's defence also played their offside trap well, consistently catching out Toshak. On the whole, we kept Liverpool's forwards very square by retaining our discipline and holding a high line, said McClintock. Arsenal gained greater control as the first half went on, but they weren't exactly threatening Liverpool either though. It wasn't until just before half-time that either side came close to scoring. First Radford crossed from the right, finding George Armstrong's head at the back post to call Ray Clements into action. At the other end, a free kick routine saw Alec Lindsay fire a low shot at goal, requiring Bob Wilson to dive to stop it. These chances weren't signs of a more thrilling half to come though. Prior to the match, Shankly had cheekily suggested that Arsenal must have been fatigued after their title run-in, which Mee denied.
Yes, well, Liverpool are very good at making statements of this nature. It's part of the war of nerves that they practice. It doesn't cut much ice with us. We're not drained. If anything, we're going into the cup final in a better frame of mind, indeed, than last Saturday, for instance.
McClintock later admitted that Shankly had been right though. It was my 67th match of the season, and I was running on empty, he said.
I was completely gone. I'd given so much that year, and every game was another game. I played the pre-season games, the cup games, the league games, a whole lot. And I don't know, it was about 85 or 86 games I'd played that year.
Liverpool weren't any better though. The match was played in the blazing sun, with no breeze. This meant the players didn't have to deal with the ball being blown around by the wind, but also meant there was nothing to cool them down. Even before half-time, it was obvious many of the players were already exhausted, with sweat seeping through their shirts. Liverpool had special embroidered shirts made for the occasion, However, they were long-sleeved and Toshak described them as a woolen material.
Personally, I was absolutely knackered in the game. I couldn't pick my legs up. It was boiling hot and we wore these jerseys. They were brand fire new jerseys and they were so heavy. You couldn't breathe through them. And I felt absolutely shattered in that game.
It was an unusual error considering Shankly and the boot room's typical attention to detail. Arsenal shirts were at least short-sleeved and made from cotton, but they probably weren't much more breathable than Liverpool's when compared to modern kits. As a result, the two teams faded heavily. Gaps opened up for both sides as players struggled to track back, yet their opponents were generally too tired to exploit those gaps. Coming out for the second half, Liverpool lined up in something more resembling a 4-3-3. Ian Callaghan had a tendency to tuck inside off a flank and often did so in the first half, but in the second he seemed to be permanently stationed in the centre, rather than starting wide and moving inside when the situation called for it. This helped to bolster Liverpool's midfield. One of the few players to really come alive in the second half was John Radford. The Arsenal striker had dropped off and pulled wide in the first half, however this had little real effect until after the break. Pretty much every chance Arsenal created in the second half involved Radford, setting up his teammates with a pass.
Trying to lift that over Smith's head, he lifts it forward for Kennedy! Oh, what a miss!
Or a cross.
And a first-time cross there, Kennedy turning it down!
Even his ability to throw the ball long was utilised late on, putting the cat among the pigeons in the Liverpool box from throw-ins.
There's his throw again, and McClintock going in!
Mee was the first manager to make a change, substituting Story for Eddie Kelly just after the hour mark. He made the same move in the semi-finals against Stoke, with Kelly giving Arsenal greater control in midfield, and so repeated it here. Shankly followed suit minutes later, replacing Evans with Peter Thompson. The winger offered Liverpool much more than Evans had, keeping hold of the ball and linking play together in attack. Liverpool's players seemed to be dealing with the heat worse than Arsenal's were, and were suffering from cramp even before the 90 minutes were up.
And again you get the feeling that Arsenal are lasting this most punishing pace, just a fraction the better.
Although Liverpool's defence played well, they likely wouldn't have made it to the final whistle were it not for the excellent Ray Clements, who saved them on several occasions. A goal line block from Alec Lindsay saw Liverpool make it to extra time. After 90 goalless minutes, it took only around 90 seconds of extra time for Liverpool to open the scoring. Lloyd headed away a long ball, with Emlyn Hughes knocking it onto Thompson, who released Highway down the left. Given space by Rice, Highway shaped as if he planned on cutting inside onto his right foot, only to go down the outside and finish past Wilson at his near post with his left. Prior to this, Wilson had had a great game, coming off his line to help out his defenders with Toshak by claiming crosses. This appeared to backfire in this instance though, leaving a space for Highway to sneak his shot through. Wilson had also apparently dismissed Highway's left foot as a scoring weapon in a newspaper article before the final, so the Irishman was particularly satisfied to prove him wrong. Liverpool didn't simply sit back after taking the lead, continuing to search for a second goal, but they made sure to get men back behind the ball when they didn't have it. Still, Arsenal equalised less than 10 minutes later. Unsurprisingly, Radford played a key role, dropping off to receive a pass from Kennedy and looping it back over his head into the box. Wrestling with Kelly, Hughes missed his header and the ball got stuck between him and Smith, with neither man able to scramble it away before it was poked past Clements into the net. It was one of the softest goals Wembley had ever witnessed, Smith said. Graham was initially credited with the goal.
George will always say he touched it. Close call, I think.
Listen, I thought it brushed my knee.
Graham claimed it. But the more I keep looking at the video of the game, he's got a guilty look on his face.
However, ITV were able to prove using replays that it was actually Kelly who had provided the finishing touch, making him the first substitute to score in an FA Cup final.
Now, I thought that the first Arsenal goal was scored by George Graham, and so did practically every journalist in the press box. We can show you now that, in fact, it was scored by Eddie Kelly. You'll see John Radford lift the ball over his own head, high into the air, and Eddie Kelly will challenge for it. What you've got to watch out for in a moment is as George Graham comes in to make his late challenge. There's Kelly going for the ball, and it'll come off the chest of Tommy Smith, and Kelly will get another touch. Now watch Graham coming in from the right of the picture. Does he touch that ball? We say he doesn't.
10 minutes later, Arsenal would take the lead. A Liverpool goal kick fell to the Gunners and was nodded onto their attackers. Radford and George exchanged passes, and Radford cut inside, drawing in Smith and opening up space for George. George received the pass and quickly fired a rocket past Clements before collapsing to the turf. George had tried his luck from distance several times throughout the match, and he finally converted it when it counted most. A lot of people were tired, he said, but I could always hit the ball from anywhere. I may have been the only one capable of scoring a goal like that.
Braddy didn't want to shoot when we got down the other end. He didn't have enough energy, and I was the only one that could shoot that hard.
Probably only Charlie had the energy. The power of his shot was unbelievable. But we were all knackered. We were all absolutely knackered at the end of the game. But Charlie's, at the end of the game, he had this power, this great shooting ability, you know, and that gave us a double.
You know, the boy who'd stood on the North Bank, the local boy made good, the local boy that I had taught as a teacher, you know. I mean, Charlie was one of my students at Holloway School, and there he was, not only winning the FA Cup for us, but then very memorably lying on his back, and, you know, whether he was knackered or whether he was doing it for effect, the plain fact is, it got us over the line.
I was so tired, I was laying on the floor, but didn't I kill some time? I must have laid on the floor for half hour. Must have took the whole of extra time up.
People said to him, what were you saying to him? Get up, you lazy sod, it's 30 minutes to go yet.
Liverpool's attacking strategy for extra time had mainly been to get the ball out to Callaghan, now back out on the wing again, to send it across, and in need of a goal they pushed more men forward in an attempt to flood the box. It just wasn't enough though. Liverpool's players continued to give their all, sprinting until the final moments, but it was simply beyond them. Arsenal held out, completing their double. Hardly helped by the heat, it hadn't been a free-flowing game, but on the balance of play it was hard to argue that Arsenal didn't deserve their victory. Neither side had created many chances, but the Gunners had created more. By getting to the final and taking Arsenal the distance, Shankly's knew Liverpool had shown they were one of the best teams in the country, but they weren't quite the best. Arsenal were the better side, admitted Hughes. We didn't deserve to win. We were a new team and we were still finding our feet, Toshak recalled. That first season we'd overachieved in many ways. That Wembley day had just come a little too early for us. A year earlier, most of them had been playing lower league or reserve football, so it's unsurprising the occasion got to Liverpool, whereas Arsenal's side was mainly comprised of experienced pros. We were too nervy, said Highway. We just didn't play as we can. I froze on the day and so did a few of the other lads, remembered Clements. I don't remember a thing about it. It was all too much for me. Most big games I remember certain aspects of them, but that one, I only remembered the goals. To this day, I still don't know what happened with our equaliser and the game just came and went. I remember sitting in the dressing room afterwards thinking, Christ, I've played in a cup final. It might be the only one, and I don't remember it. Liverpool's FA Cup run had ended up mimicking a previous time they made it to the final. Just as in 1950, they beat Everton in the semis to set up a meeting with Arsenal at Wembley, which they would go on to lose. Again, just as in 1950, despite the loss, Liverpool supporters would flood the streets of the city to welcome back the team. It was unbelievable, said Brian Hall. Hundreds of thousands of people greeting us. Once the team got to St George's Hall, Shankly took to the microphone to address the adoring crowd.
Since I come here to Liverpool or to Anfield, I have drummed it into our players time and again that they are privileged to play for you. And if they didn't believe me, they believe me now.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to support the channel. You can get updates on what I'm doing by following on Twitter and Facebook, links are in the description, but most importantly by supporting Holding Midfield on Patreon. Without financial support, I can't justify the time it goes into making these videos to keep the channel alive while also receiving access to premium content. Thanks for watching.